about the middle of July. There are like 3 weeks left. That period of time when my old daughter. Yes.
I'd like to welcome everyone to the bar luncheon today. We have a lot of guests. I would like to call Bill Persinsky forward to provide the scholarship awards.
Each year, the Wake County Bar Association Foundation provides scholarships to deserving law students with ties to Wake County. This year, we are very pleased through the generosity of our members and through Sally Kearns, who donates the proceeds of the golf tournament to the scholarship fund. We are able to give for the first time 3 scholarships of $3,000 apiece. The winners this year of the scholarships, first, let me tell you about Zheng Bao. Zheng has gone through quite a bit of trouble to be here today. He was in China for the past 3 weeks. He has flown 26 hours, had his luggage lost, had numerous layovers, and then did not know that he had won the scholarship until he got home at 3 o'clock this morning, got a letter from me and a voicemail from me saying, could you come by the women's club at 12:30? And he called me at 9 o'clock this morning when I got into the office and said, I'll be there. I may be incoherent, but I'll be there. Zheng is a rising first-year law student at Duke. He came to this country from China in 1992. He went to Albright College in Pennsylvania, where he finished 10th in his class. He majored in international business and in biochemistry, won numerous awards and prizes in biochemistry and in business. He became a scientist at GlaxoSmithKline, where he has been for the past 8 years here in Wake County. He has been very involved in a number of community activities, has a long-standing commitment to Habitat for Humanity, has been a mentor to students. He and his wife are now undertaking a rather unusual quest in that they are both starting law school this fall at separate law schools. So first I would like to award scholarship and a plaque to Zheng Bao.
Thank you very much.
Our second winner is Audrey Kazusal. Audrey is she's a rising 2L at Duke. She went to undergrad at NC State, where she had a 3.7 average. She worked her way through school, and despite the fact that she's a single mom raising a son over here, Elliot. There's Elliot. Has an outstanding academic record. She is in the JD LLM program at Duke, where she is carrying a 3.6 average. And she has won a number of awards, including an Oralist Award at the Jessup Cup Regional Competition. I'd like to award this scholarship to Audrey Kazusal. And finally, our last winner is Jennifer Hillman. Jennifer is a lifelong resident of Knightdale. She is a rising 2L at William and Mary. Jennifer is the first person in the history of the scholarship to have received it twice. She was an undergraduate at UNC, where she majored in philosophy and Spanish. She's a former legal assistant at Johnson Hearn. She's been very involved in volunteer work, including work for legal aid and also in the Big Buddy program. She has done just a tremendous job academically and really has outstanding. And I'd like to award this scholarship to Jennifer Hillman. Congratulations to all our scholarship winners.
I would like to go back just a second and introduce the parents of our scholarship award winners. We forgot to do that. I'd like to ask Mr. and Mrs. Hillman to stand, please. The parents of Jennifer Hillman, they're here today to and also Antonio Cazusal is here. I believe his wife Sherry was here as well. I think Audrey's son gave out.
It has been an annual tradition for our bar to recognize at a luncheon meeting, generally this time of the year, those attorneys who have been licensed to practice for 50 years. I can think of no one more qualified to conduct this recognition ceremony today than Howard F. Twiggs. Virtually every attorney in this room knows Howard or has had professional association with him. And for the record, though, even though you do know him, let me note just a few of his many accomplishments. He, of course, is a Raleigh native, was admitted to the North Carolina State Bar in 1957, received both his undergraduate and his JD degrees from Wake Forest University. In his 46-plus years of practice, he has concentrated for the significant part of that time in the areas of plaintiff's personal injury, business torts, and professional negligence. Howard has been recognized with numerous professional and civic memberships and awards. Among those, in 1961, he was the Raleigh JC's Man of the Year. I think I remember reading about that, Howard, in either the Raleigh Times or the News and Observer, believe it or not. In 1995 and 1996, he was the president of the Association of the Trial Lawyers of America. He has been a member for many years of the Board of Governors and is former president of the North Carolina Academy of Trial Lawyers and the recipient of the Academy's highest honor, the Judge Walter Clark Award. He is a fellow in the International Society of Barristers, president of the Roscoe Pound Institute, member and former chair of the Wake Forest University Law School Board of Visitors, and former president of that institution's alumni council. He was Wake Forest University's 2002 distinguished alumnus. Of course, he was president of this association in the 10th Judicial District Bar in 1986 and 1987. Many of you here today are old enough to remember and have voted for Howard when he was a member of the North Carolina House of Representatives from 1966 through 74. In that chamber, he chaired the Judiciary I Committee and held other leadership positions. In talking with Howard about that service those years ago, I learned something that I had not known. Among the measures that he championed were bills to eliminate any reference to race. There were over 200 of them even existing then in the North Carolina General Statutes. He sponsored several bills that were required to establish the North Carolina State Zoo, along with his co-sponsor, the late Archie McMillan, a member of this association and who practiced here for many years, brother of Robert. Howard was the principal House sponsor of the rewrite of the wrongful death statute. He's a past member of the North Carolina Courts Commission and the Chief Justice's Commission on Professionalism. We are honored to have Howard Twiggs speak to us today to recognize these lawyers and then reflect on the topic of professionalism. Howard?
Thank you very much, George. When George mentioned I was more qualified, knew of no one more qualified, he meant that he knew no one was closer to being the age of Methuselah to speak to you, I think, to introduce these people. When he mentioned reading the article in the paper, I didn't realize, George, when that was in the paper, I still remember the article, that you were old enough to read at the time that article was published. It's a real pleasure to be back here. I had the job, which was probably my favorite job of all times, which was the program chairman of this association when I was president-elect. I thoroughly enjoyed it then, and sorry that I miss as many meetings of the association as I do today. But when I think back through those days, I remember Allen Head well. And some of you may not know this, but for the last 30 years, Allen has been asked to be president of this association probably for at least 20 times. I even went to the president of the bar and asked, can he be nominated, because Alan said he didn't want to run against any of his members. He was given the green light to run and decided again not to do that. But I didn't know whether you knew the high esteem that he was held in and continues to be held in today. And thank you very much, Alan, for all you do. It's my opportunity first to recognize those and to introduce those who practice law now for 50 years. You had a list of 5 who were given to you originally. We only have 2 of those here today. We found out that Herb Lamson, one of the 50 whose name was given to us by the state bar, actually died several years ago. He stopped practicing in the 1980s. Many of us here remember Herb, but he will not be recognized today for that reason. 2 others who are not here who I will mention today and will introduce in their absence are Lee Smith and Jim Trotter. First, I'd like to begin, though, by recognizing someone whose name was given me as Clifton Hunt, Jr. I did not recognize that name until I got a call from the office saying that when I tried to contact him, that Ted Hunt was calling. And I didn't recognize the name, and I thought maybe it was a solicitor and started not to take his call. Then I finally decided it had been a rather dull day and I would. So I took Ted's call and recognized him from a past association that I had with him. Ted, come up here if you will. Thank you. Ted Hunt was the son of an Army officer. He was born in Washington, D.C. He moved around quite often, ending his term in the service, in fact, when his father was stationed in Japan after the Second World War, and he was stationed there at the same time. Ted went to Virginia Tech. His education there was interrupted by the Second World War when he went into the service and became a second lieutenant, building and installing pontoon bridges which could handle tanks, heavy equipment during the final days of the war in Europe. He was one of the people who actually built the bridges over the Rhine and the Danube River during our advancement toward Berlin in the Second World War. When I thought about this, I remembered that I've got a cottage on the beach, a small cottage, which is very close to being washed away, and I wish that Ted had designed my foundation. Then it would float back and to a site rather than but someday being moved back. After VE Day, Ted was in Europe, and he asked for reassignment to the Pacific. The ship that he was on its way to the Panama Canal when it was stopped because we had dropped the bomb on Hiroshima, the first atomic bomb, of course, and his ship was diverted then to Norfolk. He served the rest of the war in Norfolk, later was assigned to the Philippines, to New Guinea, and later to Japan. It was in Japan that Ted first gained an interest in the law. He was a member of the Judge Advocate General's Corps and tried cases there. He returned from Europe from the service in Japan after a 5-year stint in the service, and we returned to VPI and then went to law school at Washington Lee University. After graduation, he first passed the Virginia State Bar. He passed that before he actually was licensed as a lawyer. Then took the North Carolina Bar and practiced that and passed that. Ted has practiced law. He became a patent lawyer early on in Charlotte, North Carolina, with various different partnerships. Finally, his own law firms in all 3 cities. He started in Charlotte. He practiced in Charlotte, in Gastonia, and in Greensboro. When he was in Greensboro, he was elected to the General Assembly. That's when I got to know Ted. Ted was in the General Assembly in 1971 when Sam Johnson, Archie McMillan, Buck Bunn, Wade Smith, Bob Farmer, and I were serving there together, and we knew Ted from those days. Ted was a very well-spoken, very active member of the General Assembly during that term, who was well-liked by both Republicans and by Democrats. Ted is now living in the Capitol Towers in Raleigh. His son wanted to be here today but was unable to come. When I asked Ted about his thoughts on professionalism, I loved his answer. He said, Howard, I've never been asked that question before and never thought much about it, but let me give you my answer. Says it's doing what my mother always taught me to do. She taught me to be kind. She taught me to be polite. She taught me to be honest. She taught me to be considerate. And most of all, to always do the right thing. Ted, it's certainly a pleasure to welcome you to the meeting and honor you for 50 years of service to the bar in North Carolina. No, you got to play. I have this plaque to give to you, Ted. The Wake County Bar Association honors you for your 50 years of service to the law profession in North Carolina, presented to Clifton Hunt, Jr., June 1st, 2004. Congratulations. Do you have anything to leave with? Thank you, sir.
I have an apology to make for not having practiced in Wake County. And yet to be recognized like this is something. And I'm very grateful for it. Thank you.
The second person I want to recognize who is not able to be here today, his wife is very sick. He was a member who practiced both in Rocky Mount and in Raleigh, James R. Jim Trotter. Many of us remember him. He was an outstanding lawyer who practiced first with the Spruill Law Firm in Rocky Mount, then moved to Raleigh when it became Poynter and Spruill. I've got some information written about him. I have called him on several occasions, but simply been unable to get in touch with him. I do know Jim and do miss seeing him. Jim got his undergraduate degree and his law degree from UNC in Chapel Hill, and of course practiced law in Raleigh and Rocky Mount. He later served as counsel to then Governor James Martin. He thoroughly enjoyed everything that he did in the practice of law except mediation. He simply did not like being a mediator. He said he found law school, practicing law, and advising Governor Martin to be intellectually stimulating and very satisfying. He said his practice earnings, while not impressive, were sufficient to fund a satisfying lifestyle, to educate his children, and in old age to get along, which is about as much as anyone could expect from a profession where the client's interests required those interests to come ahead of his own. When his class was admitted to the bar, Jim said that not many lawyers were rich. He says today they are. He said the last time I went to the bar center, I noted there were more BMWs, Lexus, Volvos, and Mercedes in the parking lot than Chevrolets and Fords. The shift in wealth towards the bar has happened during the years since he started practicing law. Says law practice today, he thought, seemed to be less fun than it was 50 years ago, and that we should always remind ourselves that perhaps more attention should be paid to collegiality and fun in the practice of law rather than the economic benefits that we can earn from the practice of law. He said with hindsight, he felt that a pretty good argument could be made for that and that we could pass that along to you. The next person who is not here today, too, I'd like to recognize is Lee Smith. Many of you here know Lee and know Lee well. His father was Senator Smith, who was elected to the United States Senate in 1950. He was also the president of the North Carolina Bar Association and the president of the American Bar Association, the first president of that association, the ABA, of course, from North Carolina, a position that A.P. Carlton held so well just a very few years ago. He came back to join his family's law firm with his brother, Willis Smith, Jr., who was one of my very close friends and someone that I called on to help me try cases, civil cases, when I was a lawyer. Willis was a very close friend of mine, a very dear friend, who unfortunately died in a plane crash. But Lee came back to practice with him in the early 1960s. Lee served for several years during World War II in the service. He then came back and attended Duke University for both his undergraduate and his law degree. He served as an attorney for the chief counsel at the United States Treasury Department until 1957, when he came back to Raleigh to join Smith, Leach, Anderson, and Dorset, certainly one of the best firms in Raleigh at that time, which continues to have that distinction today. He was the chairman and a member of the North Carolina Board of Elections for approximately 10 years. Chairman for 3 years and a member during the other years. He's been active in civic, charitable, and social organizations. Those included, I found out today, the Salvation Army, where he was both chairman and a member of the board. The History Museum, where he and his wife were very active in all through his practice. He was also treasurer and a director of the Badger Idell Law Office Foundation for many years and a trustee of Holding Institute. We'll have an award also to give, a plaque to give to Lee. Lee's not able to be here today. He has had a stroke and said that he was very sorry he could not attend. The final person that I have to recognize is one that certainly I have known and it's been my pleasure to know for many years. When I first entered the practice of law, one of the outstanding young lawyers in this city was Sam Johnson. He has maintained that distinction through all of these years, and I'm proud to say was my seatmate in the General Assembly for 8 years. I learned a lot from Sam, and I was going to say it later, Sam, but I'll tell you now. If there was a legislative hall of fame, certainly Sam Johnson would be a charter member of that group. I'll mention a little more about his legislative accomplishments in just a minute. Sam grew up on a farm in Sampson County. At age 16, he graduated from high school and went to Pfeiffer Junior College. He then volunteered in the Navy when he was 18, as soon as that could be done at the time, during the closing days of World War II, and became a graduate of their advanced electronics training courses. He was honorably discharged before serving his full term because the war was over, and entered the University of North Carolina at that time. His graduation from law school, he graduated in 1953. Sam tells this, so I'll tell it to you. It was interrupted by a year because Sam decided to write a novel, which he did. He said after writing the unpublished novel, he decided that it was time to get on with law school and to get on with his life, so he married his lovely wife, Ann, and went back to law school and graduated in 1953. He began his practice of law with one of North Carolina's great lawyers and a marvelous person, Howard Manning, where he said he learned so much about the civil practice of law, the ethics required and the commitment required to be a good lawyer, and he thoroughly enjoyed being a member of Howard's law practice at that time. He soon decided, though, that he wanted to have time for himself, time when he could do civic activities, time that he could devote to political matters. So he left Howard Manning and opened his own law firm on January the 1st, 1955. At that time, it was awfully hard in the practice of law. I did it 5 years later, so I know how hard it was. Sam did all of his own typing. Ann was working, and they managed to make it. Sam said that he began by taking what he considered to be worthwhile cases. I've never known Sam to do anything that wasn't worthwhile, so that comes certainly as no surprise. Said some were small, some were indigent cases, but he was equally proud of all of those that he participated in. Sam has always been a diligent worker and was that also in the General Assembly. When Sam got involved in politics, he soon became president of the YDC in Raleigh, in Wake County. Later became the president of the state YDC, and later, of course, served in the North Carolina General Assembly for a 10-year period of time. During that period of time, he was chairman of numerous committees, the most prominent being the Judiciary Committee and the Appropriations Committee. Sam, during the 8 years I served beside him, could tell me where the money in North Carolina was being spent, how it was going to be spent, and how it would be divided, even though perhaps the governor didn't know it at that time. Sam and Ann also have always been active in their church, in the Presbyterian church, both here and at the beach when they go to the beach. Sam has served as an elder, the clerk of the sessions at the Raleigh Presbyterian Church and chairman of its capital campaign. He has been an active member also of the Raleigh JCs and the Lions Club, the director of both of those organizations. His most memorable case was an FELA case representing an injured person that he took first after the case was lost to the Supreme Court of North Carolina, who ruled against him, and then took the case to the United States Supreme Court, where on a 5-4 vote, a 5-4 decision, that was reversed and Sam's client recovered. The North Carolina Bar Association on June the 17th will recognize Sam as a member of the North Carolina Bar Association's committee, General Practice Hall of Fame. I'll get it right. The Hall of Fame, which is one of the highest honors that can be bestowed by the Bar Association on anyone practicing, and there's tremendous competition for that. It's the first year Sam has been nominated, and of course, Sam, we're very proud of you for that. Sam is married, as I mentioned, to Ann. He has 2 children, Leslie and a son, Bill. He has 3 grandchildren. Winston Churchill said that every man worth his salt should have at least 3 hobbies, and Sam has many, but I'll mention 4. Amateur radio is 1, hunting and fishing, cooking, and writing. Sam, I want you to come forward, please, and I want you to congratulate with me someone who has had a memorable career, which still continues, as a lawyer, as a legislator, service to the public, and who's been a real role model for all of us, Sam Johnson. I know no one who has received more plaques than Sam has. But Sam, we have another plaque for you, which you've got to find room for on your wall, and we'll check on that. The Wake County Bar Association honors you for your 50 years of service to the law profession in North Carolina. Presented to Samuel H. Johnson, June the 1st, 2004. Congratulations.
Well, we're proud of Jennifer down there, who was with our law firm, among the other 2 recipients here today. George, thank you for your leadership in the Wake County Bar. We have several of our law members here. Bill Jocelyn, several of us worked on that Maynard case. One of them was a lawyer who was a defense counsel for a railroad, but we needed that knowledge. It was a competing railroad. I went to the bar convention that summer. The speaker was the clerk of the United States Supreme Court. On the way back to Raleigh, I thought about my strategy to see if they would review a case from the North Carolina Supreme Court by petition. And then I knew they would. I knew they would accept my case because there was a lawyer in our bar who had recently been a clerk, and I got Bill Jocelyn to sign my petition, and they granted it. I enjoy practice. I open at 7. I've done it for years. I enjoy it. I now am learning to put my phone on Do Not Disturb, and I'm writing about 2 or 3 hours a day. So when the book comes out, I'll give you an opportunity. I guess to receive this award, you have to have 2 things: longevity and keep your license. And I'm happy about that. Howard, I do enjoy all those hobbies. Last night, my house is being renovated in the kitchen and den, and the floors, I couldn't go in either part. So I cooked for 3 friends last night on the patio. We had shish kebab, and I have a wok. So we plugged that in and had stir-fry vegetables and a little beverage along with that, and had a great evening. So thank you for this. Howard, thank you so much for our many years of friendship and working together and serving in the legislature. You know, we serve with this gentleman from Guilford, too, at the same time. So thank you so much.
When Sam mentioned getting to his office at 7 o'clock in the morning, Sam, I want to tell you that I won't be visiting you at that hour of the morning. And if I did, they'd probably arrest me for being downtown in my pajamas. It's appropriate, perhaps, that I just continue with the other assignment that I'm pleased to have today, the one talking about professionalism. I think with the 50-year lawyers whose example that we have seen here, it's certainly an appropriate topic. I, for one, love being a lawyer. I'm very proud to be a lawyer, and I strongly believe in what we do. Over the past 47 years, I've seen many changes in the practice of law, and I consider most of them to be good. The quality of law school education is certainly far better now than it was before, and therefore the lawyers coming out into the practice of law today are better qualified to enter the practice of law than they were when I finished law school. President George Hearn, of course, asked me to talk about this topic, and the reason why we as lawyers should be very proud of our profession and of being lawyers in our community. In thinking about my remarks about professionalism, I was reminded last night about something that happened in my household about 20 years ago. Professionalism doesn't generate much excitement when you read it and see what the topic is. And at the breakfast table one morning, my wife Betty was talking to my youngest daughter, who then was 6 years old. And she said, to my surprise, said, "Ashley," said, "your father is giving a talk tomorrow. Do you want to go?" She was eating a cereal, and without looking up, she says, "Nope." Said, "Why you, Dad?" And I said, "Well, Ashley, I'm taking the place of a very famous lawyer, Bobby Jean Cook, who was speaking along with Philip Corboy, two of America's greatest lawyers." And I said, "He's really a magnificent speaker, but he couldn't come, so I'm taking his place." She says, "Let me know when he comes back." There's certainly better speakers on this subject, on professionalism, many in this group, Robert McMillan certainly being one, and others here too, the Chief Justice, who has a commission on professionalism, who can speak about this topic better than I. And when they come back to speak on it, I look forward to sitting with you and hearing their comments. What is professionalism? You know, when you look at Webster's dictionary, if you look it up, you see one of the most anemic definitions of professionalism that you can find. So you have to go elsewhere to see how it should be defined properly. We had a committee in the Wake County Bar Association, which in 1997 came out with a rule of professionalism for our county. Carlin Poole at that time was a co-chair of the committee, and Judge Howard Manning was the other chair of the committee. They looked at every conceivable bit of information they could find on this topic, much of it written by Robert McMillan, who was the first one who was selected to receive the Joseph Branch Award of Professionalism in drafting the definition and in defining for us what professionalism is. They put it this way: "My word is my bond, integrity is absolute, fairness and civility are necessary. Physical considerations must never override my professional responsibility. To my clients, I offer loyalty, competency, diligence, and good judgment. To the public and my profession, I offer service." Chief Justice Burley Mitchell, who set up the first commission, Chief Justice's Commission on Professionalism, with Chief Justice Lake, of course, has continued, defined it this way at the first meeting: "Professionalism in the law is not a code of ethics. It is not disciplinary rules. It's what you should do, not what you must do to keep your license." One of the great lawyers from the Midwest is a very good friend of mine, David Bossert. David has talked about professionalism in the United States for many years. He comes from South Dakota, he thinks that professionalism has really gone downhill through the years. He says he remembers the day when a lawyer's word was sufficient. There was no need to get orders. If you needed to file an answer late, you just called and said, "Will you give me 30 days?" Answer was sure, and it proceeded on that basis. He said that he remembers when lawyers and judges would actually help you, opposing lawyers, when you screwed up in court. And they would tell you how to correct it and try to help you rather than perhaps making you feel even worse than you already do before the jury and before those who are in court. He believes that David believes that the practice of law has become ugly, really ugly, and that Rambo litigation is actually rewarded for those who are jerks, and that the trial practice of law in many ways has become a toxic way to earn a living. I certainly do not pretend that there's nothing wrong in the practice of law and nothing that needs to be fixed, but I disagree with David. We've talked about it. We've been on programs together. And when you ask the group which way do you think, it depends on which group you have. It's very close. I've had friends, of course, who have committed suicide, friends who've had terrible emotional problems because of the pressures of law practice. If you look at the surveys done by the Bar Association, you'll be shocked at the number, done by this association, the number of people who've contemplated suicide themselves. So there are problems that need to be addressed, but I believe that the bar associations in this state, the law schools in this state, have done a lot to correct problems that existed, that we now have turned the curve, and that the law is now a better place to practice than it was 15 years ago, for instance, and than it was 10 years ago, and that it's growing better and certainly not worse year by year. I'm very optimistic about our profession. I have my own code of ethics, not my code of ethics, but my code of professionalism. I think all of us have to have that. It's a very personal thing. As Justice Mitchell says, it's not the law, not what you've got to do, but what you should do. My code begins first with, I am allergic to sanctions. I've never filed a sanctions motion against a lawyer, and I've never had one filed against me. I remember Charlie Young, who was one of my mentors, telling us at Hanukkah's restaurant one day that he felt where Tom Steed and many of you there, Alan, Robert McMillan, Ed Hip, and others used to go every day for coffee, and where we got guidance on professionalism. Charlie saying one day that he didn't think you should ever file sanctions against a lawyer until you had called him and taken him out for lunch, that you should give him that much latitude before filing sanctions. That stuck with me and has always meant a lot to me. We file motions to compel, yes. We've done it other ways, yes. I've done it myself, but I've never filed a sanctions motion. Certainly never brought any action in the state bar against a lawyer. Hanukkah's restaurant was located where the Waverly, in the ground floor of the Waverly Aikens bar, courthouse extension. It's on the bottom floor on the right side as you faced it. And it was really a wonderful place. The lawyers during those days used to also eat lunch together at the S&W cafeteria, which was in the same building. We had a big room upstairs. All the offices at that time, most of the offices of lawyers were downtown. We'd all meet together. It was a wonderful gathering place. The nice thing about that is you had a chance to meet and to know the lawyers who were on the other side of any case that you were on. I've always found that if you know the lawyer, if you're able to call him or her by name, if you know something about them, their children, their family, their hobbies, what they do with their life, it's harder to be rude to those people. It's harder to be mean. And it's much nicer to call to be a genuine person and to work together toward a common cause, which has got to be justice in the profession that we all love. Another thing that's been very important to me in life has been, I can honestly say this, I have never been jealous of the success of any other lawyer. I've always been very proud of the success that my friends have had. And I have friends throughout America as a result of being president of ATLA who have made billions of dollars, not millions of dollars, in the practice of law. I had one last week that got a judgment in New Orleans, Russ Herman, one of my best friends, for $590 million against the tobacco industry. A case he's been trying now for 6 years, has $6 million of his own money invested in cost in that case. And I'm very, very proud of Russ and what he's had, the tenacity that he's had to follow a case like that through. George asked me to give just a couple of very short examples of what I have done that I consider to be professional. It's self-serving, but I'm going to do what George tells me to do and give you at least two small things. One was a lawyer in town who would not file an answer in a case that I had brought. He had tremendous personal problems at the time. I knew that the court would give him an opportunity to answer if I filed for summary judgment. He deserved to be heard. His client deserved to be heard. It would be very embarrassing to him. I called him. He wouldn't return calls finally. Called his office. They wouldn't return calls. I drafted an answer, took it by, waited in his office until he came by, filed it alleging contributory negligence against my client, and handed it to him to sign, explained that it was signed, and I filed it. I won that case, thank heavens, or I might not be here today, in fact. But I was comfortable with what I did. I told my client about him. My client was well informed, although it could be by an ex-lawyer if it had come out otherwise. The second thing I did in a case that I had one time, I realized when we were selecting a jury, we went home for the night and came back. I realized one of the jurors had been passed by both sides was a friend of mine who I'd played basketball with at Broughton in 1959 when we had the only undefeated team. He played and I didn't, but I was on the same team with him. He was a great basketball player. I had represented him. I'd represented him in an action very similar to the action that we were selecting a jury for. And I was afraid, and I thought that he certainly might talk to his daughter in that period of time. I brought this to the attention of the judge and the counsel in chambers before we went in, and we decided simply to withdraw that juror. As far as what I've done wrong, one thing still stands out in my memory that happened some 30 years ago. At Lasta's Mill in Raleigh, I had a client who was out in the winter shooting at a can with a .22, single shot .22. He had grown up out there. In fact, his name was Laster. And he was just shooting at a can, and somebody up the river, up the creek, hollered, quit shooting, so he quit shooting. They then charged him with assault, misdemeanor assault, and we had to try the case. Before the case came up, the lawyer came to me on the other side and said, my client will withdraw charges for $10,000. Will you pay him $10,000? My client didn't have $10,000. I said, no. And then he told me, so this is confidential, of course, and then the judge called the case. On cross-examination, I was cross-examining the person who had brought the charge, and I said, why did you bring it? He said, I brought it to protect children in case there were any children out there. I said, there weren't any children there, were they? No. You weren't inside of the can, were you? No. The shots were one at a time because he was reloading all the time, wasn't he? He said, that's right. He said, and you say the only reason you did this was for children. He says, I wouldn't do it for any other reason. I said, but you do it for money, wouldn't you? He said, of course not. I says, didn't you offer to sell it for $5,000? I apologized to that lawyer afterwards. I should not have done that. I did it spontaneously, and I have regretted it ever since. Whether I'd won the case or not, I felt that I betrayed a confidence in that particular case. There's an old adage that says, from New England, that says you can always tell where the lamplighter has been from the light that they leave behind. Lamplighters, of course, lit the lamps, which were then they then used oil, and you could tell when they'd go around and light them. You'd see the city when you looked down from the hills, simply light up. You can always tell where the lamplighter has been from the light that it's left behind. The people in Wake County since 1951 who received the Professionalism Award, and I want all of them that are here to stand. Ann Reed had to leave. I saw Ann was here earlier. Well, Robert McMillan. Robert, I want you to stand and keep standing, please. Bill Joslin, Charles Blanchard, who I know is not able to be here today, Jim Dorsett, Wright Dixon, Charles Young, Wade Smith, Dan Blue, John McMillan, Ruffin Bailey, John Silverstein, and Ann Reed. They have been our lamplighters. It's now our job to keep those lights burning. Give them a hand, if you will, please. If you're proud to be a lawyer, which I certainly am, I think professionalism comes easy. We all have the reasons to be proud of our contribution as attorneys to the public good. Lost in the uninformed debate today is the honorable and noble history of the legal profession. One of my heroes was a great lawyer from Chicago, Ted Koskov. Ted was part poet, part lawyer. He represented what he called the little people who are hurt. Ted has wrote this, and I've added a little, subtracted a little, and modified a little. If you are a lawyer, you stand between the abuse of power and the individual. If you are a lawyer, you stand between the abuse of government and the individual. If you are a lawyer, you stand between the abuse of judicial power and the individual. If you are a lawyer, you're helping to mold the rights of individuals for generations to come. If you think about those who've been a part of our legal profession, your thoughts would at least turn to some of these. A Philadelphian in New York, the first Philadelphia lawyer, who undertook the defense of John Peter Zenger to protect his rights to publish what he chose to do, free from censorship or interference. His name was Alexander Hamilton, and he was a lawyer. You would see him at the trial of Captain Preston, another political trial, a trial that arose out of the Boston Massacre. His name was John Adams, and he was a lawyer. I know you can see him at Gettysburg, with tears in his eyes, gaunt and morose, rededicating our country to the principle of equal justice for all. As I would not be a slave, so I would not be a master. His name was Abraham Lincoln, and he was a lawyer. I know you would see him, an elemental man, fighting for one cause of another, and in Dayton, Tennessee, preaching for the legitimacy of evolution. His name was Clarence Darragh, and he was a lawyer. You would see him speaking to us from his wheelchair, lighting our spirits, making us stronger with his inspirational philosophy. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And I believe that with tears in his eyes, he was watching down on the dedication of the memorial on Memorial Day of the Second World War monument. His name was Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and he was a lawyer. You could see her standing before the podium of the Supreme Court chambers and insisting that her client, Gerald Galt, a 15-year-old boy, had the right to due process under the law, then a radical and dangerous proposition. Her name was Amelia Lewis, and she was a lawyer. You might see her on the floor of the United States House of Representatives in July of 1974, during the most serious constitutional crisis of the 20th century. She gave voice to our fear, our anguish, and our hope. Her name was Barbara Jordan, and she was a lawyer. Certainly you would see him passionate, stubborn, and gallant, brilliant and volatile, a product of a segregated education whose extraordinary skills ended it. Separate but legal is a legal fiction. There never was and never will be any separate equality. Our Constitution cannot be used to sustain practices which we as people abhor. He was the ultimate long-distance runner. His name was Thurgood Marshall, and he was a lawyer. We may see him also in Birmingham, Alabama, modest, unassuming, soft-spoken, with courage to face down the enemies of liberty and to march on, despite threats to himself and his family, using the civil justice system to bring down the Klan, the skinheads, and other hate mongers to their knees. Remember me by my clients. He is my personal role model. His name is Morris Dees, and he is a lawyer. Bringing it closer to home, we see him now, the son of a great lawyer who was a justice of the Supreme Court for 13 years. He was a native of Wake County, or is a native of Wake County, attended Wake Forest University when it was in Wake County, and graduated from law school in Winston-Salem after the college had moved. He served with distinction in the North Carolina State Senate as a Superior Court judge, as a justice of the Supreme Court of North Carolina, and now as our Chief Justice and the chairman of the Chief Justice's Commission on Professionalism. His name is Beverly Lake, and he is a lawyer. Finally, the commitment of every lawyer, a personal commitment that only you can make for yourself, is important and will guide professionalism as we move forward from today on. I hope that my remarks in some respect have helped you to focus on professionalism and in your pride and in my pride and our pride in being lawyers. Thank you very much.
That was such a memorable talk, and I'm so glad that the summer law clerks could hear it as they enter the practice of law. It's such an honorable profession, and you certainly, through all you have done, make us proud and all the other fine attorneys in Wake County. Those summer law clerks will see we've got a great group of lawyers here, and you have such a wonderful example amongst our bar of very highly professional attorneys.